For years, my father only had one piece of advice for me. Son, just keep the peace. Don't make a big deal out of things. He said it so often I could almost recite it in my sleep. But one day, that very idea of keeping the peace pushed my family to the edge of heartbreak. Because now, the only thing standing between my father's wife and my 6-year-old son isn't love, isn't reason. It's a restraining order. Can you picture that? The woman my father called his wife, the woman he trusted with his home and his life, is the same person the law had to keep away from my child. And this wasn't some small accident. It wasn't just a slap like my father tried to say later. It was the final crack in a long chain of fractures, quiet wounds, bitter silences, and venom whispered through clenched teeth, until the day it all burst like a storm. But to understand how it got to this point, you have to come back with me. Back to a sweltering summer in suburban Ohio, where it all began. It was the kind of summer where the moment you step outside, sweat rolls down your back. The sun beat down like it was trying to melt the pavement. The asphalt softened, reeking of tar, and the air was so heavy you could almost taste the metal in your lungs. And right there in that heat stood a postcard-perfect 2-story home. My father's house. The house he shared with Brenda, my stepmother. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the white fence stood straight, the front door painted a glossy shade of blue. Every yard on that street looked the same, but their house always seemed a little sharper, a little shinier, and colder. And I don't mean cold from the AC. I mean coldness that seeped from the walls, from the floor, from the very air itself. The cold that comes when there's no warmth left inside. Brenda, the woman my father called his wife, liked to imagine herself as the very picture of Southern charm. She told stories with a drawn-out sweetness, flashed a sugar-coated smile, and decorated the house like it was some kind of museum. But the truth? She had never lived a day in the South, except for a couple of short trips to Kentucky. Her house reflected her to the core. Clean to the point of sterile, every throw pillow perfectly angled at 45 degrees, the overpowering scent of gardenia perfume so strong it gave you a headache, like it was covering something up, and the dining table set like a showroom, silverware lined up with military precision, the tablecloth never off by even a single fold. And above all else, Brenda was a planner, not by profession, by nature. Birthdays, Thanksgivings, backyard barbecues, everything had to follow the script she wrote. No one was allowed to step off her stage. And my father? He just stood by, with that faint, empty smile, resting his heavy hand on my shoulder like a silent reminder, "Son, just keep the peace. It's not worth the fight." But I was used to a different kind of home. Home for me was the little apartment Clara and I shared, where Sam's toys were scattered across the living room, where the smell of homemade pizza filled the air every Friday night, where Sam, Clara's 6-year-old boy, laughed loud enough to fill every corner, while Clara hummed softly in the kitchen. It was messy, but it was a warm kind of messy. Home was the way Sam looked at me, with trust so complete it made my chest ache. He didn't call me Dad, but he didn't need to. In his eyes, I already was. And that made me a thorn in Brenda's side. She never said it outright, but she had her ways of letting it show. A sharp glare when Sam spilled his drink, a cutting remark wrapped in a sticky sweet smile, and worst of all, the whispers she poured into my father's ear saying Clara had trapped me with a child that wasn't mine. I heard it all. One Thanksgiving, through the thin walls of that perfect house, I heard her voice, sharp, acidic. "He's not family. Your son is shackled to a kid that has nothing to do with him." And my father? He stayed silent. That silence hurt worse than any words,
At the time, I didn't realize it, but that silence was the fuse. A fuse just waiting to explode.
Our wedding was only a few months away. Clara and I spent countless late nights at the kitchen table, going over every little detail. The flowers, the cake, even the tiny tuxedo Sam would wear. To me, a wedding wasn't about putting on a grand show for everyone else. It was a milestone, a promise, a moment that would officially unite me, Clara, and Sam as a family, a day that no one could take from us. But to Brenda, our wedding wasn't about love or family. To her, it was a stage, another opportunity to control, another chance to impose her version of perfect. One morning, Clara picked up a call from our florist. The woman on the line sounded hesitant. She said, "We just got a call from your mother. She asked us to change your color scheme to white and silver, said it would be more elegant." Clara turned to me wide-eyed. "I never gave her their number. How did she even get it?" I didn't answer. I already knew. Brenda had called, pretending to be the one in charge, and she wasn't shy about it either. That night at dinner, she leaned in with her sugar-sweet smile, her eyes sharp as glass. "Red and orange? Way too loud. A wedding should be refined, tasteful. Only white flowers are truly appropriate." My father nodded beside her and said, "She just wants what's best for you kids." I clenched my hands under the table. Clara pressed her lips together and stayed silent. A week later, Clara had her dress fitting. It should have been a magical moment. Clara spinning in front of the mirror, her eyes shining like a little girl in a fairy tale. But then the door opened, and Brenda walked in. No invitation, no warning, no shame. She folded her arms, standing in the corner with a smirk that screamed judgment. When Clara stepped out in her first gown, Brenda let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, it's cute, but isn't it a little plain? A wife in our family should wear something a bit more high class." The air in the room sank like a stone. Clara glanced at me, her eyes flashing with humiliation and anger. All I wanted was to grab her hand and get her out of there. And if flowers and dresses weren't enough, Brenda went further. She called our caterer. She suggested that the dinner be a formal plated meal instead of a buffet, that classical music would be far more elegant than some tacky jazz band. When I found out, I called my father, my voice shaking with anger. "Dad, why is she doing this? This is my wedding, Clara's wedding. Why does she think she gets to control every detail?" And his answer was the same every single time. "She just wants to feel like part of the family, son. You know how she is. Keep the peace." But what do you do when that so-called peace turns your most important day into someone else's stage? Day by day, I felt myself slipping further from happiness. The wedding, the day Clara and I had dreamed of, was turning into a nightmare directed by Brenda. Every flower, every song, even the guest list carried her fingerprints. Clara, who was usually so strong, now sat slumped over a cold cup of coffee, whispering, "I don't even know if this is our wedding anymore, or hers." And me, every time I turned to my father for help, I was met with the same dead phrase, "Keep the peace, son." And each time I heard it, it felt like another stone pressed down on my chest. I told myself there was still time. I told myself these were just small annoyances, that things would settle down after the wedding. But I was wrong. So very wrong. Because soon enough, the peace my father worshipped would erupt into a real storm. That night, one phone call changed everything.
Clara's brother rang to say his little girl had a high fever and he couldn't watch Sam for us. Clara had an overnight shift at the hospital and I couldn't get out of work. In that moment, I felt trapped, backed into a corner. I scrolled through my contacts, and the only name I could bring myself to dial was my father's. When he picked up, a wave of relief washed over me. He agreed immediately, said he'd be right over. But then he added one short sentence that made my stomach knot. "Brenda's coming too." I knew I should have said no. I knew I should have told him it wasn't okay. But I didn't. I heard Sam laughing in the living room. I heard the exhaustion in Clara's voice, and I caved. I told myself it was only for a few hours, that nothing would happen. But the truth is, in that moment, I opened the door and invited the nightmare in. When I left for work that evening, Sam was beaming, proudly showing his grandpa his new superhero costume. He told him that he and his little brother would be the ring guards at our wedding. My father's smile stiffened. Brenda's face stayed frozen, blank like a mask. That should have been my warning, but I ignored it. We came back around 10 o'clock that night. As soon as I pulled into the parking lot, unease crept into my chest, but I never expected what waited behind that door. The second it opened, the first sound I heard was a scream. A shrill, furious scream cut through by Sam's terrified sobs. I ran inside, and the image burned itself into my memory forever. Sam was curled up on the rug, hands covering his face. A red handprint blazed across his cheek, and towering over him was Brenda, her mask of perfection shattered, her voice a feral snarl. "He is not family. He will not ruin my wedding." Everything else blurred out. My father's useless pleas, the chaos in the room. All I could see was Sam's tear-streaked, trembling face. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I went cold. Ice down my spine, then fire in my veins. My voice came out low, flat, unshakable. "Get out." I scooped Sam into my arms, shielding him, and when that door slammed shut behind them, I knew a part of my life had slammed shut too. The apartment was silent, heavy, broken only by Sam's sobs against my chest. His little body shook as I held him tighter. In my head, a single thought screamed on repeat. How did I let this happen? An hour later, Clara came home. She didn't cry. Her warm blue eyes had turned to steel. She knelt by Sam, gently brushed her fingers across the swelling on his cheek, then looked up at me. In that look, I saw both of our decisions reflected back. From that moment on, there would be no more compromises. The next day, my father called. Once, twice, 3 times. The first 2 I let ring. The third I answered. Not an apology, not remorse. Only excuses. Weak, endless excuses pouring out like muddy water. He said Brenda had gotten carried away. He said the wedding stress was getting to her. He even dared to suggest that Sam had provoked her. I cut him off, my voice dry and hard. "She hit a 6-year-old child, Dad." There was silence. Then that same tired sigh I had grown up with, the sound of a man who always chose the easy way. "It was just a slap, Leo. People need to calm down and talk things out." And in that moment, I knew. My father would never change. He had made his choice.
So for the first time in my life, I blocked my own father's number. My finger slid across the screen, cold and final.
The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. I was no longer the son who stayed silent under my father and Brenda's control. I had seen the red mark on Sam's cheek with my own eyes. I had heard her venomous screams with my own ears. No more keeping the peace could cover that truth. We started by taking Sam to the pediatric clinic. The angry red mark had turned to mottled blue and purple, staining his cheek like something I could never wash away. The doctor examined him carefully, recording every detail in the chart. Each stroke of her pen carved the truth deeper. My son had been struck by the very woman my father loved. When she handed Sam a lollipop and us a formal medical report, I knew we were holding a weapon. Not for revenge, for protection. From the clinic, we went straight to the police station. I told the entire story to a weary-eyed but patient officer. I laid the medical report on her desk. I handed over the voicemails my father had left, each one full of excuses, each one blaming Sam, but not a shred of regret. By the time we left, I felt a strange kind of relief, not because it was over, but because for once I had done the right thing. I had chosen to protect my little family instead of surrendering to a fake version of peace. But I was wrong to think that was the hardest part. The real storm didn't come from Brenda, it didn't come from my father. It came from the rest of the family. My phone started ringing non-stop. First Aunt Susan, then Uncle Mark, then cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. One by one, their voices filled the line, not with concern, but with accusations. They said I had overreacted. They said Clara was too sensitive. They blamed me for going to the police, for dragging the family's name through the mud. In the version of the story they had been told, there was no slap. There was only an unfortunate misunderstanding, something Clara and I had blown out of proportion. Each call, each message felt like another knife to the gut. I sat in the dark living room for hours, staring at my silent phone like it was a grenade waiting to explode. The same question circled in my head. Was I doing the right thing? Had I really gone too far? Their accusations dug into old cracks in me, feeding doubts I tried desperately to push away. But then I remembered. I remembered Sam's cries, his tiny hands shaking as they covered his face, the red handprint seared into his cheek, Brenda's twisted, furious face, my father's empty silence. Clara's steady hands as she touched Sam's bruise, her eyes turning to steel as she looked up at me. The truth was undeniable. No excuse could change it. That was when Clara and I made our decision, our strategy. We would not argue. We would not defend ourselves. We would not justify. We would tell the truth plain and bare to anyone who asked. We would tell them about the slap, the bruise, the hateful words Brenda screamed into the face of a child. And then we would let them decide for themselves. Those who believed us could stay. Those who didn't, the door would close behind them. When Aunt Susan called back a second time, her voice breaking as she accused me of tearing the family apart, an old memory hit me hard. It was 2 years earlier when Clara and I had just moved in together. We'd planned a simple housewarming party. Close friends, burgers on the grill, cold beer, and laughter in the backyard. But Brenda found out, and she offered to help. Her help turned into a takeover. The burgers and beer vanished, replaced by catered dishes I couldn't even pronounce. The backyard was strung with white lilies and twinkling lights. She even hired a string trio. I remember standing there, in my own home, feeling like a stranger. Brenda's friends circled her, gushing about her flawless taste. Clara and I stood off to the side, smiling politely, while our party was stolen from us. My father just patted me on the shoulder and said, "See, she makes everything special." Looking back, I realized Brenda never just wanted to control the parties. She wanted to control the story.
She wanted to rewrite our lives in her own image, a world where Clara was just a supporting role, Sam didn't exist, and I was the obedient son in her perfect little play. That slap wasn't the beginning. It was the end. The end of my patience, the end of my role as the good son in Brenda's script, and I swore to myself she would never write another line in the story of my life. Court day came. The air inside the courtroom was thick with polished wood and old tension. I walked in with Clara and Sam, my heart heavy but clearer than ever. This wasn't just about me versus Brenda or me versus my father. It was about truth. Truth laid bare with no room left for lies. Brenda sat upright across from us, dressed like she had stepped out of a glossy magazine in an expensive cream jacket. Her face wore righteous indignation as though Clara and I were the traitors and she the victim. Beside her, my father sat slumped, looking a decade older, his shoulders bent under an invisible weight. They didn't bring a lawyer. Maybe they thought Brenda's fury and logic would sway the judge, but they were wrong. We didn't have to say much. We had the doctor's report documenting every detail of Sam's bruise. We had the voicemails, my father's excuses standing as evidence against him. We had the truth, raw, undeniable. When the judge read the decision, the entire room held its breath. A restraining order. 1 full year. Brenda was forbidden from coming near Sam. And in that moment, I heard a tiny sound escape Brenda's throat, a shocked, stifled sob. Maybe for the first time in her life, she realized she had lost control of the story. We stepped out of the courthouse into the blazing sun, and for the first time in weeks, Clara cried. But they weren't tears of fear or despair. They were tears of relief. We had done it. We had protected Sam. I squeezed her hand, looked down at the boy in my arms, and felt a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying lift off my shoulders. News of the restraining order spread quickly through the family. That thin piece of paper cut through all Brenda's lies. It was the truth, stamped and sealed by law. The phone started ringing again. This time, the voices were different. Hesitant apologies, awkward admissions that maybe they didn't know the whole story. We listened, we responded politely, but inside, the distance had already formed. Trust, once shattered, never fully mends. And then there were the ones who still clung to Brenda's narrative, who insisted we had gone too far, that we had shamed the family. For them, there was no argument, no explanation, just silence. The quiet closing of the door, because my little family had no more room for poison. My father never called again. I heard, through a cousin, that he and Brenda had moved to another state, to start over. Maybe there they would keep spinning their story, one where they were the victims, surrounded by people who had never seen the truth. But I didn't care anymore, because I had already made my choice. I chose Sam. I chose Clara. I chose my real family.
Our wedding took place on a crisp October day. The sky so blue it felt like the universe itself was blessing us. It wasn't some grand, lavish event the way Brenda had once imagined. There were no white lilies arranged in stiff perfection, no string trio filling the air, no judgmental eyes pressing down on us. Our wedding happened in a renovated barn, rustic but warm, glowing with strands of lights draped across the beams overhead. The guests were people who truly loved us. They weren't there out of obligation, and they weren't there to gossip or to judge. They came because they wanted to witness a family being built, to share in our joy. And joy was everywhere. The sound of laughter filled the room, real laughter, not forced, not laced with scrutiny, but the kind that makes your chest light. There was a moment, as I stood at the end of the aisle waiting for Clara, when a shadow of sadness crossed me. I looked at the front row, at the empty seat, where my father should have been, and I knew he would never sit there. That empty chair was a ghost of what could have been. But then I saw Sam. In his tiny suit,
Holding his little brother's hand, he walked proudly as the ring-bearer. His eyes sparkled with pride, brighter than any light in that barn. And in that instant, I understood. I hadn't lost anything. I had everything that mattered, standing right there in front of me. Then Clara. Her eyes shone brighter than the string lights above as she walked toward me. And when I took her hand, all the sadness vanished. That's when it hit me. Family isn't a word tied to blood or obligation. Family is a choice. It's who you choose to stand beside, who you choose to protect, who you choose to weather life's storms with. I used to think peace meant silence, endurance, sacrifice to avoid conflict. But I was wrong. I paid for that belief with Sam's tears, with the terror in the eyes of a 6-year-old boy. That's when I finally understood true love isn't found in endurance. True love is found in protection. In the moment you're willing to cut ties, to stand your ground, to fight if you have to, so the people you love are safe. Today, looking back, I have no regrets. Not for blocking my father's number, not for letting the law step in, because without those decisions, my little family wouldn't have survived intact. I know some will call me harsh. Some will say I turned my back on blood. But the truth is, family doesn't always mean blood. Family is where you feel safe. Family is the ones who stand beside you when the whole world turns against you. Family is laughter and hugs and a warmth no one has the right to take away. Clara and Sam, they are my real family, and I will never let anyone define it otherwise. I don't share this story to stir up hatred. I share it to remind myself, and maybe remind you too, that sometimes you have to choose. Choose between silence and truth, between keeping a false peace or fighting for a real one. And if you're ever in the place I once stood, I want you to remember one thing. You have the right to choose your family. Don't let anyone else write your story. Don't let anyone else define the worth of the people you love. Because at the end of the day, happiness isn't about pleasing everyone. Happiness is when you look around and see the faces you chose, and you know you protected them, no matter what it cost.